And 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to another edition of A Humanistic Perspective. As always, I am your host, Chad Castilla, and today I have the fortunate privilege of being joined with a very, very, very special guest. Let me give you a little background. He is an entrepreneur, a business mentor, coach, and an author himself. I have the fortunate privilege today of being joined with Anwar Jumabhoy. Anwar, thank you for joining me today.
Chad, thank you so much for what a lovely introduction. And I'm so pleased to be on your program. I mean, I think the two of us probably represent the workplace, right? Mm-hmm. And we're living in a time where we're seeing, multi-generational workplaces. Truly. And it's probably the first time in history that we have maybe 4 generations alive at the same time. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I especially think with the advancements in modern technology, I saw statistically like people who were alive even in the 60s were just having an average lifespan of about 60 to 70 years old. And with modern technology, we've really seen that tremendous pace in the elder age of the people who are alive. So I definitely think that's a very interesting dynamic. And I hope through our experience today, we'll be able to highlight how the leadership of our elder generations and how Gen Z and all of us could coexist in a perfect atmosphere.
I look forward to that. And, we have both sides. I mean, the current debate is, how do you hire and retain young people? And I keep telling, people that I work with and people that I coach, you have to start thinking about how do young people cope with older people in their workforce? And, that's a whole transition, right? It used to be your boss was 5-10 years older than you. Your boss had 5-10 years more tenure in the organization than you. Sure. And today, your boss might be younger than you and might have, a 1 month tenure longer than you.
It's really funny you bring that up because my brother, he's actually just turned 18 and he owns his own non-medical emergency transportation company. And he is that prime example of all of his employees are adults, but he is, an 18-year-old, but he's doing his thing and he's got good mentors on his side and a good board. So.
Yep. And I think that, if you look at the way that sort of humanity has evolved, and that's the subject close to you. I think the core value is one of respect, and I think we are returning, and hopefully we are returning to that core value of respect, which as you know has to be earned, right? So we got away for many years, through the sort of mechanization era, through industrialization, where respect went to the boss because he was more powerful than you. And that in a way sort of distorted the word, right? So it's great to be able to go back to sort of first principles, I guess, and talk about respect. And I sort of associate that with entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs don't have that, or typically don't have that formal sort of education. And so they rely on first principles, and entrepreneurs, naturally respect talent, right? They naturally respect capability. They naturally respect independence, and this is what puts them ahead, right?
Truly. Yeah, I believe your insight is spot on with the entrepreneurial standpoint and mindset. I would love to go back. Let's explore starting with growing up in Malaysia. I want to sort of understand the mechanisms that allowed you to become observant and build the person that stands before me today.
Well, I had a pretty normal and I would say privileged childhood, right? So, I sort of went through school and our education system is very much focused on remembering, right? So you have to remember, you have to repeat, and then you have to do your exams at the end of every year. And so it was a pretty much normal, comfortable lifestyle, which perhaps in a way left me not wanting for more. And then you sort of grow up and then you realize that there's a whole world out there, and there's many experiences that you have not had. And I think perhaps that's sort of prompted something inside me to seek out experiences. And so I've sort of had a very meandering life, right? So, I tried to be a good old-fashioned sort of child, go to university, get a job, work, actually work the summers while you're at university and get a job. And every day at the job, you think, this is not really what I want to do.
Sure.
And I think that those who know what they want to do are really quite fortunate. Because naturally, I mean, you in Asia, it's very common for parents to pay for the education of their children, right? So we sort of have a sort of privileged position that when we graduate, we don't graduate with any student debt, which is perhaps different in America. But when you graduate, the obligation, of course, is get to work quick. And so you sort of get to work and you put your nose down and you watch the world go around, and two things happen, right? One is you realize that something's not right, and B, with the way the workplace is managed, and then you also realize that maybe this is not something you want to do. So those sort of fires get lit, right? So I started working in a shipyard in the United Kingdom, which was what was called then, and perhaps still exists, it's called a closed shop. So everybody who joins the shipyard has to join a union. And so there's a union for electricians, there's a union for plumbers, a union for fitters. There was a union for people like me who were on the engineering side. And the union's job was to look after everybody's interests.
Truly. Yeah, that's similar to my background's in music business. And we have a union for all of our stagehands that come through. Very similar setup there. Now, do you guys have the stereotypical union where, breaks every 15 minutes, or what is the common conception of it?
So this is the interesting thing, right? So you work in a shipyard, and you walk across. I mean, I was in the engineering side, but you walk into the shipyard and you see a loose pipe, that's in the way, and it might cause an accident. You're not allowed to touch it, right? Because you don't belong to that union, right? So you have to call somebody from that union to manage it, right? And it seemed like that world seemed to exist where everybody looked after their own interests. And you assume that if everybody looked after their own interest, and collectively the interest of the organization, which is the one that pays the wages, can earn a living, if everybody looks after their own individual trades, that somehow collectively we would be okay, right? But what I began to see was that in looking after your own trades, you actually conflicted with other trades, or you conflicted with the goal of the organization, right? And so these sort of silos, which were very, very distinct in a shipyard. I mean, today you see that sometimes happening in organizations, right? My job is this, and therefore I'm going to do this. But you sort of step back and say, but how does that make sense for an organization? How does it make sense for all of us, right? So
Really?
You have a customer problem, and somebody says, oh, you can't rectify it because you don't have the budget, or you can't rectify it because you don't have that authority, right?
There's a prime example of this, I believe, demonstrated in the American phone system with billing and with customer service. You get so often branched into a department, and then they tell you they can't do something, and then the next department's rhetoric is completely opposite from the last one.
That's right. And this is, I think, something that stayed with me many years. So everybody got so involved in their own little compartment that you sort of, and because it was alien to me, right? And so I was coming in and I was observing this, and there were two of us from the university who joined. Probably the first time in, 10 years, they had recruited any young engineers.
Wow.
And both of us used to sit in the office wondering, is this real, right? Is this really happening? And everybody was comfortable. And you're right, we had a guy who was in charge of printing the plans, so you build you in those days, because there was no computer.
All analog work.
Yeah, you used to hand draw, and then the print man used to print it. And of course, he was in charge of the print shop. And if he didn't come to work, if John didn't come to work, then it was just tough luck. Yeah. You can't print, right?
Sure.
And John was very proud of the job. He did an excellent job. Was a lovely guy. But essentially it meant that if he didn't come to work, you couldn't print anything, right? Because, A, nobody knew, and B, you were not allowed, right? And so it just became a very strange environment. And, Chad, I'll tell you, I left the shipyard after about 1.5 years, and I moved to Singapore. And I worked in a shipyard in Singapore, which was, in comparison, maybe 20 years behind, right? So in the UK, it was a nice covered dock. We had a nice, lovely building. We all sat
Isn't
there.
that where you worked with Charlie, correct?
Correct. That's right. And so we had a lovely office, and then I moved to Singapore, and because I interviewed with this company, and they said that, we've decided. It was a group, right? So they owned a repair business, and they also owned a shipbuilding business. In those days, a rig building business. And so they said, we're going to send you to the rig building business. And I had never actually been there physically, right? I'd gone to Singapore for an interview. I interviewed in the corporate office, and I have no clue of what the shipyard looked like. And so I sort of go up on the first day of work, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is just a piece of sand along the river, and there are some sheds, and our office is in the canteen, which has been converted to an office.
Was this a union shipyard, or was this non-union?
Not at all. So not at all. So in Singapore, there was no union, and we were, I would say, in comparison to the UK, we were prehistoric, right?
Yeah, no, truly.
It was a bit of a culture shock, right? So you come to work, and then at 12:30, all the lights go off, and you think, okay, what's going on here? This is lunch break. So at 12:30, you turn off the lights, put a large plan on your desk, put your feet up, and go to sleep, because you had an hour for lunch and a nap. And it's
beautiful.
That was I think they've stopped that now, but yes. So it was, and so so what happened was that not so long after I joined, we had what is called a national observance ceremony, right? It's sort of like your 4th of July, but in Singapore, it's no fireworks. And because we were a large organization, we had the privilege of hosting a very senior deputy minister for the national flag raising observance ceremony, right? So because we had a lot of people, so he came, and so we were all lined up in the morning, and the good thing about Singapore is everything runs on time, so you don't have to worry. Nice. If it was in Malaysia, we'd be sitting there 1 hour later waiting for him to turn up. But in Singapore, and he comes there, and he says, essentially what he says is, guys, you are a sunset industry. You need too much labor, and your productivity is too low. And so if you can't survive in Singapore, then it's okay, close down. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is interesting. If this had happened in the UK, we would have probably stoned him. He wouldn't have got out alive. So in the UK, the shipyard was owned by the government. It's nationalized.
Sure.
In Singapore, it was owned indirectly by the government through a holding structure, but it was essentially a government-owned company. It became a public company. And so we sort of looked at each other and say, okay, this is interesting. Now, if you're a naval architect and the shipyard closes down, there ain't that many jobs for you.
Sure.
So um, and so we everybody just decided that they needed to upgrade, right? So we bought computers. One of the guys who was in the engineering department decided that he would become head of IT.
Nice.
And we upgraded our skill sets, and we worked together. And nobody came to us and said, "Oh, guys, the ship is sinking. We've got to find a way to keep it afloat." We just naturally reached into what I would say would be our entrepreneurial roots, right? And said, "Okay, what can I do?" And
It's
collectively, everybody says that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it almost seems as if you guys, as a collective, were inspired to take on the task yourselves. It's not as if you needed a superior. The culture itself had already built in the desire, the human innate ability to want to achieve the project at hand.
And I think part of it comes from the competitive nature, right?
Mm.
So, and it's again, if you compare it to entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs typically continually exist in a competitive environment,
Truly.
they continually are looking for how to do it better, how to do it differently, um, you know, experiment, and these are all things that entrepreneurs do, and so we went through this whole period, and you're fortunate to work for, as you say, your brother has mentors. So I had two great mentors. One was Yik, who was the head of our engineering department, and he was so cool and so calm. And I used to, as a young guy, you get agitated. So we got to decide now, 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 now. Come on, we got to do this. We got to do this. We got to do this. And in those days, you could smoke in the office, which was interesting.
Nice. There you go. Dang, different times, huh?
Different time. And so you'd go in and have a chat with Yik, and he's like, we're going to decide. And the first question he'd ask you is, when do we need to decide by? And if it wasn't today, then he say, why do we have to decide today? Right? And so that was a learning. And you mentioned Charlie, and Charlie was this amazing sales guy. And organizations survive really if they are able to sell. I mean, there's no other way of surviving, right? And Charlie had just amazing ability to connect with people. And so we built rigs for the Russian. We were always building for the Americans.
Sure.
And then, because of the embargo, we started building for the Russians, we built for the Indians, we built for the Swedes. We started finding business everywhere in the world. And at one point, there was an embargo on American products going to Russia. And so, typically a rig is built out of American suppliers, right? Most of the equipment comes out of the US, because the US is where, sort of oil drilling, Drake discovered in, 1850s or so.
Sure.
So we had to scramble and look for equipment that wasn't American. And we did all that, right? So as you're saying, it's sort of a collective. And nobody really sits down and says, "Hey, guys, if we need to do this." We just had tasks and we went about it. And probably at the back of the mind, we realized that if we were not successful, we'd all be out of a job, right? And so again, that relates to being entrepreneurial, right? And sort of the caveman. If I can't find meat today, we're gonna starve, and if we starve, we die, right? Because there ain't nobody coming to help us. And that mentality, again, as you say, the sort of the humanistic. It's not always bad. It's a good thing, right? It's a good thing to feel that, yes, you need to do something. And Chad, I'll tell you this: 8 years after I left the shipyard in the UK, it closed down.
Wow.
Some, I don't know, 40 years after I left the shipyard, or 35 years after I left the shipyard in Singapore, it's still there.
Wow. What do you account for that one being there versus the UK one not being there?
I mean, I think, okay, there are different levels, right? So if you say that why do I have a mindset that I need to do something to save myself? Where does that come from? And that's something that I don't think is a clear answer, right?
Sure.
So in the UK, it was, I have got a job, I have a salary, I have a union, and it's the union's job to protect my job, right? Where does that come from, right?
Right.
In Singapore, it was, if I don't have a job, I don't have a job. I mean, I don't have a what do you call it, out of work benefit scheme. So that's it, right? So where does this desire to excel come from? I mean, what about you, Chad? Where does it come from for you?
That's fascinating. And that's something I've been contemplating on a lot. I think intrinsically what motivates me the most is my my ability at the end of the day to be doing whatever I choose and deem makes me happy, because I understand that when I'm in the happiest state, I am
Yes,
the I am the most useful to the people around me. And all of a sudden I start living for an intrinsically selfless reason, because the most
understand.
important thing of having the base ground for myself is there. So for me, I would say uh, a lot of that comes through and is shown through just cognitive curiosity. My most important thing, um, the thing that honestly on the 4th of July, when I was thinking about my independence, the thing that I cried about the most was the freedom to explore and to learn. And the idea that there was potentially people in this world that are living right now and don't have the means or don't even understand what it's like to have the freedom to explore and choose to do and pick mindsets that you want for yourself. And so at the end of the day, I guess that existential crisis towards having that freedom to do that is what pushes me and drives me to choose the crafts that I choose. But I never really am worried or see, it's fascinating because my background was I came from a pretty poor family. We faced a lot of adversity, and it was a tough environment to grow up in, but it motivated you and pushed you. Because it's funny you say that. I was going to ask the nature versus nurture part of being an
Yes,
entrepreneur, because I feel like a lot of my personal experience and upbringing for me and my brother, it pushed us in two separate directions. For me, it took me and I built that entrepreneurial spirit to go out and try and learn and use as much of the knowledge as I could to show and perform, because that's sort of what my background was. That's what I love to do. But for
yes.
him, that same experience, that same visualization, having the water turned off when you're young, being through all those same experiences forced him to grow up immediately and want to provide for the family and help pay for the bills and take over. And so it's really interesting that you bring that point up. And I would say when I was younger, a lot of my reason and pushing was to get out of what I thought my experience I was having was. But now as I get older, it's just having the ability and the freedoms to be me and continue to explore and to become accepting of the world in which I'm living in and choosing to explore. Yeah.
Chad, you bring up some fascinating points, right? So there are two different things that strike me, right? So one is,
Mm.
there are only two motivators for humans, right? So there are only two motivators. If you strip everything down and ask people, like for example, in sessions that I do, why do you come to work? And they start with, oh, I want to pay the bills, I want to have the relationships, etc., etc. And you sort of boil it down and say, okay, but really, what is it that drives you, right? And there are only two drivers, right? There is the pursuit of pleasure,
Mm.
so that motivates you to go somewhere, and then there's the avoidance of pain.
Mm.
So there are only two motivators. And if you break it down, and of course, if you see that in the workplace, and actually you see that in your daily life, right?
Mm.
So sometimes in the day, you might say, oh, I'm not going to have the candy bar because you are afraid of the pain, right?
Right.
And other times you might say, I'm going to go and pitch for this and get this revenue because you want the pleasure, right? So in the day also, it goes up and down. So sometimes it's pain avoidance, and sometimes it's pursuit of pleasure, right?
Mm.
So it, perhaps the drivers in your family, in your brother, the the past probably caused more pain,
Mm.
or he felt more pain, and therefore the desire to not feel that pain was very, very strong, right?
Yeah.
And you see that in immigrant and refugee communities,
Mm.
right? They're the ones who are very successful because they're so close to having nothing.
Right.
They know what it's like to have nothing, that when they have a chance to accumulate, they're so afraid of losing it that they just want to accumulate.
Yeah,
And that's a driver, right?
it
Because they
truly
know that it
is.
could be taken away. It has been taken away in the past, right?
Yeah.
And so they want to accumulate, and then of course when they get to a certain point, then they want to avoid risk.
Mm.
But so entrepreneurs are driven sometimes by this pain pleasure, right? So that gives them drive to win.
Mm.
And the second thing I wanted to ask you is that we all want to do things that we enjoy, that we get
Sure.
energy behind. Where does the moral compass come from? Because some of those things
Mm.
that we enjoy may not be enjoyable to the people around us.
Truly.
you know,
Yeah.
so you've got this meeting of your desires with that sense of, is it right or wrong? Right? I mean, there's a huge
Mm.
debate now when you see, Richard Branson's gone up to space, and
Oh yeah, the
uh,
billionaire
Jeff,
space
Be-
race.
yeah, Jeff Bezos has gone up to space, and a lot of people are asking, but then why is there poverty in the world? Why can't they,
Mm.
you know, put some muscle and resource behind that? I mean, it's not their obligation to solve the world's problems, but
Truly.
it is a fair question, right?
It is.
Can we or should we direct where energy is, and where energy is put? I don't know. It's a
Mm.
difficult question.
Truly. I wanted to ask, um, could you break down a little bit of the managerial science? What encompasses that? Who are some philosophers that you subscribe to that understand managerial science that helped you sort of explore the topic yourself? Sort of, how does your personal experience with that look like?
So, whilst I sort of did an MBA and studied management, I've never been a fan of the toolbox approach, right?
Mm.
So you have this problem, you open this toolbox, and you go to there. Um, Drucker is considered Peter Drucker is considered the sort of grandfather of management, and Drucker himself, if you read his work, also talked about the importance of entrepreneurial thinking, right?
Mm.
But it pushed management in a direction where people are machines,
Mm.
and therefore you need to manage machines. And so we had a whole period of time where when you hired somebody, the manager's job was to get productivity out of them. And we went through a whole period of management where it was all about productivity, and how do you get productivity out of people and treat people basically as robots.
Mm.
Make sure they sit correctly, manage their time, manage their resources, manage their output, make sure the reporting is all set and
Sure.
done. And so we went through that period, and I found it fascinating, this time and motion stuff. And then you go on, and you later on, and you see, people like Stephen Covey, who really talks about the abundance mindset, and how you can free up people to get more.
Mm.
And so I don't have a particular mentor, but I read a lot, and I like to read biographies of business people.
Mm.
So where, and I read, I guess, most of the modern titans, from Phil Knight to of Nike, to everybody's story. Ray Kroc from McDonald's.
Do you have one
Uh,
that particularly you're fond of, or someone you look up to the most out of those stories?
I guess it would be Stephen Covey, right? So I had the privilege of seeing him live, and he came across with a concept which I found really, I guess, mind blowing in a sense, right? And basically, he said that you've got to change your mindset from the sort of bowl concept, right? The bowl means that there's only a limited amount of food, and therefore whoever grabs it first eats, and who doesn't grab it doesn't. And he sort of said that, well, what about thinking about enlarging the bowl? And I think that that's a concept that for Asians, we are coming a little later to that because we are closer in terms of history to our poverty, right? So we are closer. We still have, one generation that remembers what it was like to be poor, and so there's always this concept of you've got to protect yourself, you've got to take care of your family, etc. And I think those sort of primordial drivers are sometimes stay, right? So there's a wonderful book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. I think it's called The Cathedral and Bazaar, and it talks about how the open source movement was built, and it basically talks about how you have a directed organization, and the example it gives is of Encarta. And Microsoft spent all this money to produce all these research to books, etc. And then Wikipedia came about, and they built the whole wiki site without paying any money. And these are people who are willing to volunteer their time because they felt that it was good for people to have knowledge. And why not share it, right? It doesn't cost them anything. And you have a very famous president, I think, who said, I think it was, I can't remember which president it was, but basically he said that by the light from my candle, by illuminating others, doesn't take away the light from me. And so
I like that.
We have this very strange mix of emotions, right? If you do something, is it taking away from somebody else? So and in modern day, you can equate it to, if I find a supplier who is really ace and puts my business ahead, am I willing to share that supplier with my competitors?
I know exactly what you mean.
I found this really great supplier, and am I going to tell everybody, right? So this sort of plays out, and we come back to the workplace. This whole thing about people being robots happened in the US in the automotive industry in the 1960s, right? 1960s, 1970s.
Yep. Was it Henry Ford, the assembly line, the creation of that?
Yeah, but then after the assembly line, you had General Motors who came about, and General Motors became, and there are large parts of the US where until the 70s, you had a lot of people on the shop floor, right? So the labor content in a car factory was huge, and the car unions are very powerful unions, right? And then suddenly you had Toyota, Volkswagen come with very heavily automated, robotized factories. And today, if you see the Tesla factory, you can see videos of it. I mean, the old story
mesmerizing.
Yeah, I mean, in the old story of, the factory has a dog and a man, and you say, what's the man's job? And the man's job is to look after things. And what's the dog's job? The dog's job is to make sure the man doesn't touch anything.
That's how I had a good friend named Jake. He was working at Amazon, and he quite literally he could manage the work, but it was the actual atmosphere of automation and the fact that all he did was talk to packages and move in one single spot, and he had to run from his spot to the bathroom and back just to be within the time frame of the automated system.
Yes,
it was so disheartening, and so it was so demoralizing from what that human experience of having a coexisting atmosphere and working towards an objective within a company. It was crazy to see him get to the point where he wanted to leave, just because frankly there was no human interaction. I wanted to ask you, how does this entrepreneurial mindset and everyone sort of evolving and becoming a part of that interplay with the future of automation?
Well, so before I get to that, let me tell you a story of three companies, right?
Mm.
So they are the three leaders in the industry. There is one leader who says, we're all about knowledge, and we are going to explore knowledge, and we are going to empower our people to chase down their dreams, to chase down their own projects. And we're quite happy to fund exploratory stuff. But at the same time, we want customers, right? So there's this company that what I would call cerebral exploratory mindset, right? And then there's another company that says, we're all about selling, just give us a product and we'll sell it because we just know how to sell, right? And we are great at selling. And we have this whole lovely structure of incentive schemes, and nobody reports to more than 10 people, and we cascade
Sounds like an
down.
insurance company.
Well, let me ask you that in a minute. So we have the second company that's a selling expert. And then we have a third company which says that, we're going to be the cost leaders. So everything that we're going to do, we're going to look at the cost and we're going to squeeze out every dime we can and make sure it's most super efficient company. So you have a company that's exploratory, you have a company that's sales oriented, and you have a company that's cost driven. These are three companies. And these three companies are number one, number two, number three in the industry. Okay. And they are global companies, and they all play in the web services game.
Okay.
Now, which company you think is the one that's the one that's focused on cost? It's Amazon, right?
Right.
And which company is the company that's focused on selling? It's Microsoft. And which company is the company that's focused on exploring?
Apple.
It's Google.
Or
Well, it's Google
yeah.
in the web services, right? So if we just talk
services.
about cloud computing, then these are the three leaders. They're completely different DNAs, right?
Right.
And you can see it. So Google will always talk about, the analytics that we can bring to you, and if you're our customer, then we'll help you with this, and we're developing that, etc., etc. And Microsoft is, we're just super efficient, and we'll make sure that and Amazon has come to us because we will make sure that we save you every dime that you can. And so when you come with, so you've got the sort of, and the entrepreneurial mindset works in all three areas, right?
Sure.
But there is an overarching DNA or embedded into the company, and everybody there goes with the program.
Right.
So this sort of, I mean, as I say, life is not simple, right? Get used to it. And you're going to have these complexities. So yeah, it's interesting to see, the entrepreneurial mindset can work in all these areas. So in the case of Amazon, they probably get more excited if you find a way of making things faster and better. Whereas in Google, they might get more excited if you found some new product line or etc. And Microsoft would be more excited if you found a way to sell more, get more customers. So you have these personalities, but to your question on automation, what happened in the 1960s and 1970s in the automotive industry, where they drove people out because you had, if you imagine the wage curve, if you are less skilled, you obviously earn less money. If you're highly skilled, you earn a lot more money. And what was happening in the automotive industry in America, there was an aberration. There were mid-skilled people who were earning a lot of money. And by rights, that shouldn't have existed. But, it was a history of unions, etc. So you had mid-skilled people that were earning $22 an hour. And Then automation came, those jobs disappeared. And to earn $20, $25 an hour, you had to be high skilled.
Right.
So a lot of mid-skilled people just fell off the boat, and they're sitting there wondering what happened, right? And their jobs got taken away by automation and AI. And what's happening today in the workplace is the same thing, same phenomena is happening in the workplace. So you find a lot of mid-level managers who aren't really contributing very much, but have now become sort of overpaid and mid-skilled, and those jobs are being eaten away by automation. And those guys are struggling, and there's a very large, wide band, right? So there's a wide band of people who are struggling in the workplace because their jobs are not that important anymore. They can be replaced by technology. So there's a whole generation of people who might be in their 30s or 40s or 40s or 50s who are gatherers of information. They gather information, they repurpose it, and today that's not required, right? Information goes straight through. Everybody has a dashboard. Everybody knows what's going on. Right. And so there's big disruption coming in the workplace, which is something that you have to worry about, right? And to your point about being humanistic, you don't need to hire people from down the road. You can hire people from all over the world. Is that morally a right thing to do? For who? For you? For the country? How are countries going to respond? True. When you can have any employee you want working anywhere in the world, what happens to the guy down the street? I mean, there's a limit to, how many physical resources you need. And so it's a dilemma going forward, right?
Truly. I wanted to ask, what is the current economic landscape of Malaysia, and what is that like?
We are a country that in the 80s was considered of high growth. So in the 80s, Korea, Malaysia, Singapore was considered high growth because it was a period of manufacturing. So that was a point where a lot of labor was required, and we were the sort of manufacturing hub. And whether it was refrigerators or air conditioners, China had not yet emerged, and therefore a lot of that manufacturing took place in Malaysia. And then over a period of time, of course, factories got bigger in China, and then that sort of got eroded. But we were left with semiconductor and glove manufacturing. So semiconductor and glove manufacturing is still very big in Malaysia. I think today, Malaysia produces 60% of the global gloves.
Wow.
So glove making and it traditionally was because we had rubber, but today the gloves don't have really any rubber content. They're nitrile gloves. But that years of experience of how do you do manufacturing of rubber gloves, which is a very fragile product, has become embedded, and there are maybe 4 or 5 companies in Malaysia that are very good at this, and they've become sort of the global suppliers. So Malaysia's done well in that respect, but Malaysia also suffers from what we call a sort of middle income trap, right? You built on the back of manufacturing, low cost labor, but labor has become such a small component of a product today that low cost labor doesn't really mean anything. And today, companies are looking for talent, right? They're looking not just for labor. And so a lot of companies and countries are stuck in this middle income trap. I don't have the expertise and the talent pool to go to high end. I'm too expensive to survive as a low cost manufacturing center. So it's a little stuck. The Koreans have taken off, the Taiwanese have taken off because of their long history in the semiconductor industry. And so they've, we used to joke about the fridges that could talk to the phones, and today uh, you have cups that can talk to the phone, right?
Literally.
So if you have a coffee cup, you put it in a holder, and you can use your phone to say, start heating up now.
Mhm.
And so all this technology is suddenly coming alive and has practical use. I mean, I don't know whether heating up coffee is, but many years ago you could start and heat up your car, right?
Mhm.
From your key, right? You could say, you could get your car to start up in the winter so that it would be warm when you got to it. And then that's what happens with innovation and technology, right? There is one use case, and then nothing happens for ages and ages and ages. And then suddenly there's a whole bunch of use cases, right? You can turn on the fan, the light, heat up a coffee, the air conditioner. But it took forever. It took forever from that one use case of I can start my car in the winter, and nobody thought about, oh, what else can I do?
Right.
And that's the thing about innovation, right? And that's where entrepreneurs come in. You think about the trolley bag. I think the trolley bag, the bag with the wheels on it that you pull around. Everybody has one now.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first bag with wheels was sold in a department store in the US in the 1970s. But for years, people said that you carry a bag, and if you don't want to carry it, you put it in a trolley, on a trolley. And you would see trolleys going by, and you would see people carrying bags going by. And it's lovely to watch those old movies, right? People come off the plane and they're carrying
Oh,
everybody's carrying their suitcase, right? You wonder how the hell they get away with such a light suitcase. But anyway,
seriously.
um, you see these trolleys, and you see and nobody said, let's put these two things together and put wheels on the bag, right? So
Mm.
sometimes we stare at stuff and we think, hey, why didn't I? I mean, it becomes obvious, when you look back, but at that time, it's not so obvious. I
Right.
mean, the other great example I give to people is look at the gift bag. Wrapping paper existed for eons.
Mm.
So did um, so did carrier bags, right? So you wrap a gift and then you put it into a carrier bag, and then somebody came up one day with gift bags. I'd love to know who it was, but it's brilliant, right? You don't have to wrap the gift anymore. You put the gift in the gift bag, put a bit of crepe paper on the top, and it's a fully wrapped gift that you can carry around.
Truly.
Otherwise, you spend all this money wrapping your gift and you put it in a brown paper bag.
So, in your opinion, the people who have that mindset and can make those observations and then key in on them and create innovations, do you believe that they are more observant people, or that they are just more naturally innovative people, like they're more engineers, or are they?
Yes, I think both work.
Okay.
So there are some people who observe something and think this can't be the way to do it,
Mm.
and therefore come up with a better way of doing it, right? And then you have another bunch of people who have some experience with a problem and realize there is no solution for it, and then create the solution. So you have both sides of both types of people. You have the people that create the solutions,
Mm.
and then you have people who recognize the gaps and try and fill that gap. So I think both types of people exist. I think that the entrepreneurs that are most successful are the ones that
Yeah.
build on competence.
Mm.
So the ones that start with some competence and perhaps start something not for the purpose of solving a major problem, but solving a small problem, and it snowballs, right? And then
Right.
as you develop customer iterations, then your product gets better and better and better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at Steve Jobs when he launched the iPhone, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a great product, and that's why CEO of Nokia, I think Ollie Pecker at the time, laughed at it, because I think that the brilliance of the entrepreneur vis-a-vis the existing company is the entrepreneur realizes that the ground that he is standing on is not stable, and therefore he continually has to shift, and he has to evolve. He has that mindset. Now, if you say that he have that mindset because of what reason? I mean, there are many reasons, right? It could be he has that mindset because he uh, is afraid of failing. He's afraid of losing everything. So he has that mindset of fear, right? We
Sure.
talked about the two drivers. But entrepreneurs typically don't stay static. And the ones that say, I have a business model and I'm going to launch it, are the ones that fail. The ones that are successful are the ones who have this naturally evolving view of the world, evolving view of the customer, and they tend to evolve. The companies, unfortunately, don't have that because they're so focused on cost and structure and procedure and you've got to do it this way because we did it 100 times this way. And
super litigic.
yeah, I mean, and it has its purpose, but this is the beauty of entrepreneurs, right? They understand when you can be flexible, when you need to be flexible. And so companies get so taken by explaining to you why you can't do something. And the entrepreneur mindset is really about what you can do. And that's why I tell people that entrepreneurs are not different people, right? They just do things differently. And everybody can do that. Stop what you're doing if it doesn't make sense. Ask yourself, is this contributing to a better customer experience? Is it contributing to more revenue? And if it isn't, then there's something wrong.
Sure.
And large companies don't ask this question. They just think that it will continue. And partly it's because, I don't know. I think, and that's one of the reasons why was, what drove me to write the book, that there has to be a better way to manage a company. True. Because when things go awry, it's never the guys at the top who pay the price. It's always the guys at the bottom. Let's close down this division. Let's downsize. It's never, hey, I'm a terrible boss. I made these decisions. Maybe I should go.
Sure. I wanted to touch with the book, 9 Entrepreneurisms. Is there one specific of the 9 traits that you had to contemplate on the most, or took the most brain power, or the one that maybe surprised you the most while writing the book, or the one that was, the most elaborate process-wise for writing?
I think that there isn't really. So the 9, we interviewed over 100 people. We started with a whole bunch of, what are the traits or practices of successful entrepreneurs, and then we sort of whittled them down to these 9. And I think these 9 are the ones that are relevant and are learnable, and that's why we say that it's a practice for a VUCA world. The one that people come up to me is they say, you didn't talk about drive and grit and determination, and our response is really, but that's what passion does. So passion drives you to do things, right?
It's an after
passion. It's an after, yeah, exactly. And the same thing, people say, oh, why do you have learning in there? And learning is the same thing. I mean, there's no point knowing something if you can't incorporate it, act on it, right? And if you look at the most successful companies, they're constantly learning. They're learning how the customer preference is moving. They're learning how their people are moving. They're learning how to do things better. And so learning is something that's, if you have innovation, it's pointless if you don't learn. As Jeff Bezos famously says, right? You need to experiment all the time.
Right.
Because you don't want to be in a position where you have to make a sort of Hail Mary bet, right? Which is where
I think that is highlighted often too in people are always like, oh no, they're wasting money. A rocket blew up and it failed during a test. But I would argue that that's actually more important. by it failing and going through that experience, you can calculate that and then determine for that risk. I don't think that that crash was a waste, actually. I think rather that that's a learning opportunity and a fantastic experience.
And that's exactly what Elon Musk said, right? When he landed, when the rocket landed and then exploded, and he said, "Whoa, that was an amazing
Yeah.
experience," right?
Yeah.
So it is, we learn the most from things that go wrong,
Mm.
right? And it's like I tell people that when if you have a child, your child or any of you don't tell the child, "Hey, little one, don't start walking, you can't do it yet." I mean, that would be like silly, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Very
and then
absurd.
when the child tries and falls, you say, "Oh my gosh, that was a failure, don't do it again, sonny, don't do it again." Right? So these are these practices that somehow in an organization we don't reflect on it. We don't, I mean, nobody got up and started walking. I mean, apparently Buddha did that, because
Yeah.
the Buddhists feel that, I think on the seventh day Buddha got up and walked.
Hmm.
But for us average normal people, we meander along, right? We try, and the guy who invented Dyson, the guy who invented the bladeless fan,
Hmm. I
and the
love Dyson
vacuum.
commercials.
That,
Some of the
yeah,
best commercials.
and Dyson, I think, says that he went through 5,700 prototypes in order to get it right.
Wow.
Um, and if you read James Dyson's story, he did, he the first commercial sale he had of his Dyson vacuum cleaner, because nobody wanted to sell the vacuum cleaner because it didn't have a bag, and most of the
Mm.
vacuum cleaner manufacturers made money from the bag. And so he found somebody in Japan who actually main business was selling filofaxes. I mean, I don't think you remember what a filofax is, but it's this
Mm-mm.
really nice diary which comes with clips, and you can
Mm.
insert pages and dividers, etc. It
Wow, I
was
kind
meant
of
to
actually want
organize
one
you.
of those.
Yeah, it was in the days before you had Google Calendar and
Yeah.
workflow, and
Sure.
but he found somebody in Japan who believed in it, and he started selling the product, and of course then he came back to UK and US. But yeah, I mean, you get these moments of brilliance that are driven by people who take their experience as a learning experience, right?
Hmm.
And that's what happens in large companies as well, right? They get too used to saying, "Oh, that was a fail," and they don't sit down and say, "Okay, that didn't go so well. Let's see what we learned from it." And therefore, learning is very powerful. And entrepreneurs naturally do that because they don't have the confidence of success in the past.
Sure.
Whereas companies say, "We've done this for 20 years, 30 years, whatever, and we don't need to experiment." And entrepreneurs know that they're not standing on solid ground, and they need to and if you look back, Chad, you'll find that in your life, very often you come back to things that you experienced many years before.
Right.
Right? So if you look at the founders of Airbnb, they supposedly they did launch their business in San Francisco. I think it was at there was a conference of architects, I think, and the
Mm.
hotel room sold out, and they decided to rent out the mattress. But he had actually done that a couple of years earlier, when he had a garage sale, and somebody bought an item, and um, and then he sort of had a beer with the guy, and he said, "Where are you staying tonight?" And the guy said, "Well, I don't know, I haven't have a place." And so he said, "Oh, well, you can come and stay at my house, and I have a air mattress." And he let the guy stay in his house, and then when he got home, he thought to himself, "What am I doing? I'm letting a total stranger spend the night with me."
Seeking discomfort. There's something beautiful about pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone and what that can really inspire inside of us.
Yes, and you probably look back, and there's probably some point in your past that you learned something. I mean, Steve Jobs famously talked about his calligraphy classes, right? Elon Musk was, I think, 2 days into his PhD on battery technologies before he quit and decided to start PayPal, I mean, the company that became PayPal. So what is in your past that you think triggered you, or that you leaned on later in your life? I mean, were you a music producer when you were young, or did you fool around with
Well, I guess I did. I mean, I've been performing from a very, very young age. Yeah, like I started music at about fourth, fifth grade. That's when I'd start
Okay.
playing and performing. But that's fascinating. I don't know what I, I guess I could think of one. Here's one. From performing, there was something about working with improv and being on a stage and then always being characters and going on speech team that I vividly remember having just a good sense of how to walk in a room and immediately adjust and be exactly what needs to be in that space to coexist
Yep.
and to make sure that everyone, like my observation skills and my ability to adjust my personality and persona, because I had explored so many emotions of a human. I think that is one thing that I heavily can rely on and pull on, because for me, it's interesting. When I give an interview, I guess I sort of allow my emotional instinct based on what someone says to sort of guide where I go next. I try not to be like, oh, because of this means I should go here. I'm like, okay, where do I feel I should go? And I think a lot of that comes from that interplay and being so open to exploring that as a performer.
So Chad, I didn't put you on the spot. Then where does moral compass come from? Because I have a take on entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs, I feel are amoral. So they're not driven by any particular morality, and so you can't say that, oh, an entrepreneur will always do the right thing, because for him, his company, his success is very important. And as Peter Thiel, I think, famously said that in the day when there are robots running the world, they're not going to stample and trample on Anwar because they don't like Anwar. It just happened that Anwar was in the way, and their algorithm said that their path is more important than his, and so they trample on him. So they're amoral, basically. They're amoral. So whose responsibility is it? Is it God? Is it God fearing? Is it something your parents have to set into you? Is it your school?
That's fascinating. See, I don't necessarily think. I think the only thing that holds our morality is our personal free will. I think that is the only thing that holds our morality in place, because if you think about it, morality, it's so varied, right? There's not, someone might do something like, for example, someone in a situation where they have no food, no resources, and specifically I refer to Stalin during what he was doing in Russia.
Yes.
I mean, the parents would choose sometimes to eat the children just to survive, because they knew that child could not bear the growth that it needed to in order to survive. And so that question pushes me so often, because I think about some of the most traumatic turmoils and devastating periods of society and what got those people through. And really all it is, at the end of the day, what I can tend to see and what I commonly find is the free will to pursue that there could be something further, or there could be a different outcome, is the only thing that drives to set a baseline of morality, in my opinion.
So you mean that there should be a good outcome?
Yeah, like I think, I guess I don't know. I think morality just, I really don't think morality, I guess, would be, it's just something you do because you have the choice to do it. I don't know. I guess
but it could be you like, killing cats, or you're killing dogs, or whatever.
Sure.
It's a tough one, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, there is a very interesting author, Israeli-born author, psychologist, I think, teaches at the university in Israel, by the name of Yuval Noah Harari.
Mm.
And Yuval's first book was *Sapiens*, and he basically said that the human beings survive because we have two things. We can work collectively with people we don't know, right? And the second thing is that we believe in delayed gratification. And so he said that human beings survive because they know that if they understand the concept that if you do something today, you get a benefit tomorrow.
Sure.
And he said animals don't understand this, right? So he said that if you fill a stadium, if you go and watch uh, the NBA, I mean, there was a surprise win this year, right? So if you fill the NBA stadium with monkeys, you'd have riot, right? Because you can't convince the monkeys that they need to sit next to another monkey and everybody needs to watch the game because that's what they're there for. Right? But
Sure.
human beings have this belief system that allows us to work together with people we don't know. And we believe in delayed gratification. So you can't tell a monkey, give me back the banana, I'll give you 3 tomorrow. I mean, that's just not a concept that monkeys know, right?
Sure.
And so he said that and basically he says that, we talk about this, we believe in God, and there's no logical reason why we should believe in God, right? But that sort of unites and, sort of puts a structure in society. And then in his, later books, he really talks about God being inside everybody as a moral compass.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, in a way, I guess my interpretation is he's saying there is no God except the one that exists in you. And then the question comes, okay, so how does this God inside you build your moral compass so that you don't go around, shooting everybody or whatever?
That's summarizing exactly the point I was just trying to clarify there. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so I think the good thing about open society, the good thing about the way today where everybody knows everything, is that you allow societal norms to evolve. And
Mm.
that's what Yuval says, right? We've replaced a God on top who sets the rules and tells us what's right and wrong with a societal understanding of what's right and wrong. And I mean, it's an interesting concept.
Sure. Are you familiar with the concept of consumerism?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what is your interpretation of consumerism in the current marketplace that we live in around us? And do you think it's devastational? It's a positive thing? I know when I'm finding myself exploring a little bit of Edward Bernays and some of his early readings, and I find a lot of his perspective to be both intriguing in the fact that the man could observe it, but I also think his morality, his internal morality, was set a little bit askewed, in my opinion. I feel like he took away, he didn't really care necessarily about making observations that were productive for society, but rather he wanted to make observations that he knew were like very easy to play with or to manipulate to an extent. So I'm just curious what your
I
perception
mean,
or thought on it is.
we until the 1980s, or I would say 90s, early 80s, we lived in a world where assets were pretty much stable. So we didn't have what I call the asset bubble, right? So the asset bubble came in the 80s with property, and then it's coming now in the 2000s with stocks, etc. So we're living in a period where lots of people have lots of money,
Sure.
and therefore they can buy lots of things. And you have companies that want to sell lots of things, and so you have, in the I would say in the 80s, a lot of companies targeted young professional women, and especially I don't know, in America I'm not sure, but certainly in Asia, young professional women lived at home with their parents in Asia, and therefore could spend 80% of their income on themselves. And so this was, marketeers saying, "Whoa, wonderful! let's have more makeup brands, handbags, shoes, jewelry, etc., etc." And driven by this huge disposable income, right? and you saw that in a way with fast fashion, right? Where you buy something, the manufacturers make it cheap so you can buy it and use it and throw it away. And I had a debate with somebody once saying that, their view was that this is the brand's fault and the brand is at fault. And I'm like, but fast fashion wouldn't exist if you didn't buy it. And like many things in life, right? The knife can be used to cut or to hurt, right? It's a tool, or it's a tool that's positive and both destructive. So consumerism is a really tough one.
Sure.
Should you have a limit to how much you can buy? I mean, I have a wardrobe and I have a limited number of hangers. And although now I haven't worn a shirt for a while, I mean, I'm normally in a t-shirt, but when I was going to the office, I would have, and whenever I buy a shirt, I take out one that I had, and I limited my spending by the number of hangers I had. And so you take out the shirt and you give it for recycling, or you give it to a charitable home or whatever. So it's a really tough one, right?
Sure.
Companies want to grow, so they need to sell more. And because companies have a large cost structure, and again, it comes back to the point of being entrepreneurial, right? Is it better to have one large company employing 100 people? Or is it better to have 10 small companies employing 10 people each?
See, if I were to answer that question, my thought stems to migrational patterns and what we see when we tend to see excessive rise in population. And a lot of theorists who believe that as we push towards 2040, 2050, if populations were to increase at dramatic rates, we would start to see major cities actually crumble infrastructure-wise, and we would see societies start to go to more small community focus. So in my opinion, I feel like in anticipation of evolutionary structure in regards to population, and also to, I think, for sustainability and longevity, I like the strategy of smaller and allowing more diversity into.
Yeah. So if you take the example of 100 people working for one company and 10 people working for 10 companies, you can imagine that the 100 people working for one company need to spend a lot more on infrastructure and, et cetera, and then the 10 people working in 10 companies, right? So the 10 people, the small company doesn't need so much formality, so much structure, so much investment. And in some respects, when labor doesn't become such a big factor, it could be that the 10-man company is more productive than the 100-man company, right? So your brother's business, or the local ice cream parlor that makes on-premise and competes with Baskin and Robbins, or the local coffee shop that makes on-premise and grinds on-premise and competes with Starbucks, right? You could make the argument that the smaller businesses collectively are more productive than the one large business. And to your point on migrations, maybe that's what the pandemic is teaching us, that we don't have to all work in the city. And if you look at property prices in the suburbs, I mean, my son works in San Francisco.
Holy cow, talk about a raise in prices.
Yeah, exactly. And, I'm just blown away by how expensive a city is. But in the last 1 year, rents have gone down.
Yeah.
And in contrast, Chicago, rents have gone up, because it's sort of normalized, because a lot of people that he works with have decided that they just leave San Francisco, right? Go live with their parents, go live with their partners, find a bigger place, because he hasn't gone to work physical work for maybe since, I think, February last year.
Wow.
And he moved apartments recently, and I asked him, I said, so how far or close is it to your office? And he said, hey, Pops, I never really thought about it because I haven't been to the office for a year and a half. So what difference does it make? Is it, he said, no, I like the neighborhood, I like the apartment. So we decided to move there, right? So in a way, the pandemic is reshaping the way we live. And that's why I say there are three sort of mega trends happening driven by entrepreneurs, right? The way that we learn has completely changed, right? So the idea of, I'll go and get a book and I'm going to spend 6 months studying before I do it is out of the window. I'm going to talk to a few people. I'm going to listen to some podcasts. I'm going to try it. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, I'll try it again and I'll get it done, right? So the way we learn is completely changed, right? Then the way that we work has changed, right? So I don't have to physically go to the office. I don't have to work for a company down the road. I can work for a company, there are lots and lots of opportunities, and I don't have to work for time anymore. I can work for output. And so the ones that are more confident and competent say, don't pay me for the hours. And companies are also turning around and saying, I don't want to pay for hour, I want to pay for output. Right? So the way we work has dramatically changed. People are willing to work for output. It used to be a bad thing, right, in the sweatshop days. And then Uber came along, and it became okay to work for our productivity, right? So the way that we learn has changed, the way that we work has changed, and finally the way that we invest has changed. So people are saying, why should I invest 10 years of my life in this company? I just start my own company. Why should I invest in a property? I invest in Bitcoins. Why should I invest in stocks that pay dividends? I mean, who wants a 3% annualized return?
Right.
I'll invest in the next startup, right? And so you see so much money going into equity funding, which never happened even 10 years ago.
Sure.
So how we learn, how we work, how we invest is, dramatically changing the world.
Do you believe that our current markets are set up in a way that is incentivizing additional competition and innovation? Or do you believe, and I'm talking on a global scale,
Yes.
do you believe that, or do you believe it's the opposite?
I don't think there's a fixed view. I don't think there's a fixed view. So there are some things where, if you look at the GPU cards, right? So the GPU cards are primarily coming from one company, NVIDIA, right? So and NVIDIA, I think it's called NVIDIA. I think is the leading player in graphics cards, and it is an unusual company because it was started by a Taiwanese entrepreneur, and I think he still is the CEO. It's rare for a company to have such a long-standing. So when you have so much, when you have the requirement of so much investment, then of course there's a barrier to competition.
Of course.
But other than that, I don't think you can stop competition anymore. In the give you an example. In the 1890s, Rockefeller controlled, I think, 90% of the refining capacity in America.
Yeah,
and
that's very accurate.
The primary product was kerosene, right? This is before the automobile was invented. So kerosene was used for lighting, etc.
Sure.
So America, because of Drake finding the oil, America controlled, and Rockefeller steadfastly buying up all the refining capacity and creating his own transportation hub using the tank cars on which ran on, basically he had tanks instead of barrels to move oil. He controlled, I think, 90% of the refining capacity in America. And America had 85% of the global market share for kerosene. The balance, the primary competitor was Russia. And I think Russia had 15% or something like that. And when Russian oil tried to come into America, Rockefeller campaigned for import duties. So America stopped Russian imports from coming in legislatively, right? Um, so in those days, you could legislate and get away with it. Today, you can't stop competition. And people are willing to, entrepreneurs are willing to give up that corner office dream in return for flexibility, for maybe less money, but the potential of a windfall, less money, but the potential of a windfall, sitting right with what they feel, like, as you quite rightly said, doing something that they want to do. It's too late to say, as I say, the arrow has left the bow. I mean, you can't stop competition anymore.
Sure. I like that perspective. Yeah. I think I initially asked that question and I wasn't thinking broad enough on the concept of it. But when I look at it from a global scale, I do think there is a decent amount of competition in the market. I wanted to get from your perspective. I know there's always nuance to these thoughts, but of the major players, China, Russia, and America, what is a Malaysian perspective on them currently in 2021?
The Malaysian perspective is really irrelevant. I mean, in a sense, we're a small country. I guess we are more international in our thinking and our resources and knowledge base. I think that there is obviously a tussle between America and China in terms of who's going to be, the global power,
economic
right?
Superpower. Sure.
Yeah. So before industrialization, the global GDP, before the invention of the machine, the global GDP was, I think, 40% China and 40% India, because it was a global economy of raw materials.
Sure.
Right. And then these two countries got left behind after the steam engine came in and mechanization came in. And then these two countries basically went into a decline in terms of percentage of GDP. Now we have a new world where America is realizing that, 20 years of investment in the arms business isn't paying a dividend. And China is saying that our 20 years of not investing in arms and investing in roads and infrastructure is paying a huge dividend, right? So it's too late. It's too late for this path to be corrected. You just have to live it out, right? China made the right bet. They moved 400 million people out of poverty, and they've modernized the country. There's just no words to describe, how well they've come along, right?
Sure.
So they've equipped themselves and their population with different tool sets, whereas America has chosen to equip part of their population with the arms industry, and it's very hard to roll that back, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I think we talked about the three companies, right? The DNAs of Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, right? So these are the DNAs of the two countries, right? That is what it is, right? This country has invested in infrastructure, roads, etc., and this country has invested in obviously some technologies, but a lot of it in arms, right? So now you question yourself, what are you capable of doing, right? So that's you park that thought in terms of your DNA.
Sure.
One thing that Americans don't understand in the dealing with the Chinese is that because Americans are an individualistic society, you rely on the general population to say, stand with me. China is a collective society.
Right.
They can count on every Chinese standing with them.
Right.
So if America and China have a dispute, it's a dispute between the American government and not the government of China, but the people of China. And that's something the Americans just don't seem to understand.
Wow. Yeah.
So in America, it's like, yes, the government is upset with that government. But there are lots
Right.
of American companies who have investments in China, and they're quite happy to work with China,
Right.
right? But for the Chinese, because they come from a socialistic, and Mao is not so long ago,
Right.
I mean, it's like if you go back to America, right, and you go to some parts and you have these wonderful movies on the hillbillies, etc., right? If
Yep.
if I pick a fight with you, it's not that you're picking a fight with me, you're picking a fight with my whole family,
Right.
right? So that's a concept that is understood, right? And so the same thing, when you pick a fight with China, you're not picking a fight with the Chinese government, you're picking a fight. And every Chinese, or not, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but every Chinese national feels that you're picking a fight with him.
That's so fascinating. I've never thought about the idea that the collective mentality that the people, like, we always think of it from a top down perspective here. We think, oh, they have a socialistic regime, they have a power hold, so it's them controlling the people. And we see it as, because we have an individual personality, like, oh, that's not a good thing, and that people probably don't want to subscribe to that, but just don't know that, when really there's probably a large majority of nationalists or people who actually, like, have fully, that is just the way of being, and that is it. And I think that is interesting too. If we did see a a war begin between the two countries, it would be so interesting to see, with so much dissonance in the society here in America right now, how we would come together, and how we would even, where would that conversation even begin to happen? Because I feel like right now, in our current sphere, or at least what our media is trying to portray for us here in America, it's like, oh, we're diffracted, we're a separated society. And it's something that I hope, through having this show too, is like, when people hear conversations with different people of different backgrounds and different beliefs, that, like, it's still okay to have these conversations, because tolerance is one thing that has gone down so heavily since COVID hit in America.
Yep. I mean, there isn't going to be a war, so that's not really the question. But, Chad, to your point, I tell you another difference between China and the rest of the world, which is, in China, they have a very rigid civil service structure, right? So I think every year they have I think they admit 900,000 people into the government.
Okay.
And the government could be, you could go into university, you could go into the army, you could go into um, uh, um, uh, provincial government. So there's sort of path laid out for these sort of 900,000 people that they hire. You can't go into politics. So the Chinese view, I mean, from my perspective, is you first build competence and then you go into politics. Whereas in democratic societies, you are political first, then you get into power, and then you run something, right?
So true.
So people who get into power have two handicaps in outside of China. They have two handicaps, right? So the first handicap is they don't have the competence of running, because all they've ever run is an election campaign, right? So they don't have the competence of running a P&L, of people, etc., of making investments, etc. So the people that go into politics don't have this competence, right? So that's one drawback that they have. The second competence they don't have is, how do you manage people who don't agree with you? So if you look at a political campaign, everybody who works for you loves you, right? How do you manage and people who don't love you, you can avoid them, right? So you don't build the competence of managing people who don't agree with you. And this is the problem that comes about when you are politically first and not competence based, right? So suddenly you are in charge of an organization where 50% of the people not just don't agree with you, 50% of the people that you manage want to get rid of you.
Right.
And you never build that competence, right? Because you're just used to everybody who works for you loves you.
It's eliciting all of the same feelings I have when learning about Socrates and his idea that everyone had to become a philosopher first before participating in Socratic discussion in a political atmosphere. But before that, you had to become a thinker for yourself.
Yes.
That's, you know, I think that's so lost, and that's wow, what a fantastic observation. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Thank you. We're getting very close to the end of our time here, so I
That's
have three
great. Yeah.
questions that I
Oh
ask
dear.
all of
Okay,
my
let's do.
guests. All
Okay,
right,
let's go. Yeah.
cool. The first one is, what is your definition of happiness?
My definition of happiness is something that you feel comfortable doing every day and you
Mm,
derive joy from it.
very nice. Okay, I like that. The next one is, what do you believe is the meaning of life?
I honestly have no idea. And there are
Okay.
many days where you think, is there any point?
Yeah, truly, truly. Yeah, that's one that that's one I always like asking because I'm just so curious myself. I really don't have my answer either. And then the last one that I always ask every guest: if you had one piece of wisdom you have to give to someone who's listening that might be young and they have no idea where they're going in life next, or they might be old and they're having a midlife crisis and they're just not really sure what to do next, what is one piece of wisdom for that person who is listening that you would leave for them?
Experiment.
Mm,
Just experiment with different things, with different experiences.
I love that.
Experiment. And that's the thing that I would tell parents, which unfortunately I don't think I did with my kids,
Mm,
is allow them to experiment different things.
yeah. That's a fantastic sentiment. I want to give you an opportunity right before we finish up here. Do you have anything that you would like to plug where people can check you out, where they can find you?
I love having conversations. So thank you, Chad, for looking me up. I'm
Mm,
easiest found on LinkedIn. My name is Anwar Jumabhoy, and you can find me on LinkedIn and also on my URL, which is anwarjumaboy.com.
beautiful. Well, thank you, Anwar, so much for your time today. And it's been a very insightful conversation. Your wisdom and your time has just made me so excited to take the opportunity to go back, edit this footage, and get to reflect on this amazing conversation.
Thanks for having me, Chad.
Of course. All right,
All right.
folks, this has been another edition of A Humanistic Perspective. Thank you for joining us. And as always, have a great day.